Hey, isn't that lovely? Zoom is talking to me now. So welcome, everybody. We're going to be doing our Solar Tuesday. And at any point, if you guys have questions or want to jump in, if you're new to it, and we'll probably have more people keep joining. But I wanted to go ahead and hit on some of the items I found in the solar news this week that I thought were interesting. One thing that I saw that's pretty much brand new is a online crowdsourcing investment platform for solar projects. It's called Raise Green. This is something that apparently people are using where if you've got $50 or more to invest, you can go into this Raise Green platform. And there are a number of projects where you basically invest as if it's a community solar project. So that struck me as kind of interesting that the financial aspect of it is coming to crowdfunding for solar projects. So I don't know, Bob, that might be something as an installer you might be interested in if you want to do your own little leasing program.
What's the name again?
It's called Raise Green, like to raise money.
S-E-D Green.
R-A-I-S-E, yep, green. Raise, like raising tulips, raising money. Speaking of financing, there were a couple of other things in the news that are in the same vein. So I just think this is kind of a sign of the times that the industry is becoming more mature, because we're not talking about innovations in technology often. Here we're talking about innovations in financing. So there's the crowdfunding, but also Sonova is a company that has just announced the addition of 8 more states to their installer financed program, their loan program for solar plus batteries. So apparently they're doing this in 22 states right now. Is their network of installers will actually finance the project for the homeowner or the business. And then, so you don't have to go to a bank. They actually advertise that they provide insurance as part of this and a 25-year guarantee on the installation and products. So it's kind of a, buy here, pay here kind of approach to solar, where you're getting these things financed by the installation company. So Sonova, and one of the states that they announced is Illinois. So they're coming into your neck of the woods there, Bob. But the new states they just added are Illinois, Maryland, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas, Florida, Rhode Island, and New York. So
and what's the name of them?
Sonova, S-U-N-N-O-V-A, Sonova. And there's another one that I saw in the news called Blue Planet Energy that's doing something similar in California, where they have a zero down financing for the solar and battery systems for their customers. So basically, sounds like a solar lease, but it's not really a lease. It's a solar finance. No upfront costs, but you're going to be paying them. And they argue now it's a fixed bill. Your electric bill is no longer fluctuating. You're going to have a fixed bill coming to you each month for the capital expenditure of the install, which will be less than what your electric bill would have been all along. So it's a good sales pitch. Yeah.
Who gets the credit?
Well, in this case, I would imagine the homeowner, because it's not a lease.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one of the advantages of that over a solar lease. Yeah, well, so the tax credits and things like that. Yeah, Bob?
All right, so this whole thing about the installer providing the financing for the install really scares the living daylights out of me.
Yeah.
After 27 years of being in my own business, I have been screwed multi-times, because they found out that if I finance it at the end of the install, they come up to me and say one sentence. There's always one sentence we had a friend come out and he said, you did a schlock job and I'm not paying you.
Oh,
Now, at that point, it only cost me anywhere from $60,000 to $120,000 to bring them through the court systems to get my $30,000.
yep,
And they know that.
yep. Well, so you wouldn't be one of those that would be in the finance business. So,
I can't believe that installers would get involved with that, because I would see the installers being involved with the finance company backing them up.
yeah. My guess is, you know, these are larger companies and I suspect they have investors. So that's who is providing the capital for this. That's basically a bank loan process. You know, that's all it is, being facilitated through the installation company. So, you know, and you're from Chicago, you know, just get the guys to come out and tell them, you know, if they
Yeah,
don't
we're good
pay,
at collections. We're
if
good
they
at
don't
collections.
pay, they might not be walking. So
That Vito helping me.
that's right. But these are some new techniques there. And the other item that I found of interest in the news is there's a New Jersey law being passed that all new warehouses must be solar ready. So they're looking at targeting large flat buildings in New Jersey. They define these as 100,000 foot or larger that are being primarily designed for the storage of goods. So that's interesting that they're basically, you know, California just recently passed that all new buildings have to have solar installed if it's possible to install. And we're seeing similar legislation in 12 different states moving through the process, where all new construction will have solar on it. But this is basically saying for these large commercial buildings, it must be designed with solar in mind, but solar is not necessarily installed on the structure. So things like the conduits, the raceways, the wiring, all of those would be in place, but not the solar panels. All right. Any comments on the news? Anything anybody else might have to add on that before we jump into some of the discussion? If anybody has, did anyone have a solar question that you wanted to bring up?
I did have a question. What was the YouTube link to look at the recorded versions of these meetings?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure the link exactly, but if you go into the Blue Rock Station YouTube account, so go into YouTube and then just type in Blue Rock Station, I guess it'll take you into our channel, and all of the past sessions of that, plus any other videos we've done are in there. So and one thing that's interesting, you mentioned YouTube, it's a fairly new development. And I only mention it because I was looking at it, because some of our videos are getting quite a number of views. Like we have one video that was put in by some interns years ago that has over 500,000 views on it, which is silly. But anyway, I was trying to figure out, how do you monetize these videos? And I've always kind of shied away from it because I find the advertising annoying. But they've changed their process. You've got to have something like 1,000 subscribers plus 400 hours during a calendar year of people listening to your videos. So I was like, okay, that's no problem. Except now what they've done is in their last little update, they said, oh, and by the way, we changed the rules so that if you are not yet able to monetize your videos, we'll monetize them and keep the money from the ad revenues. So all my videos you may find have advertisements on them, but that's not my doing. It's YouTube has decided to piggyback on these and not share any of the proceeds.
Why don't you just send an email to the 500,000 people and ask everybody to send you $1?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure they will. So, yep. So Google has failed in their pledge not to be evil. What can we say? So it's a low bar, but they failed to reach it. All right, so did anyone have any other questions in the wonderful wacky world of solar before I jump into the topic du jour? So I'm hoping that you guys will have some feedback on this, but I thought about solar agriculture, and I had run across some articles about it. And what they're finding is, with wind turbines, the agricultural environment was a good location for wind turbines. It provided income to the farmers without much disruption of a footprint within their fields for raising cattle or raising crops or whatever. Solar, it struck me, would be less accommodating to agriculture because it's a much wider footprint for the same amount of power. But what they're beginning to do is they're finding that if they separate the panels and raise them up a bit, then they can begin to raise certain crops within these solar arrays and raise them quite nicely. In fact, there was a German study that found the productivity within these, and they didn't go into detail what they meant by productivity, but it was up 160% for the farm. So I suspect a lot of that had to do with savings from the cost of electricity as well. But there was a study in India that showed that yields within the fields was up 40% where they integrated solar. And a lot of that is because of the shading. So in the summertime, it cools the crops and you have less damage due to burn. And in the wintertime, apparently the radiated heat from these panels helps heat the crops. So it's a moderating effect on the climate of that particular field. As long as you space them far enough apart so that the sun, as it traverses, can provide sunlight to all parts of the field. And of course, most of these are then going to be an east-west orientation as opposed to a north-south, because if it was north-south orientation, you would be blocking some of the light on certain parts all the time. So if you orient them east-west or completely flat, then parts of it are going to be exposed to the sun during the course of the day. Also, they found that in drought areas, the presence of the solar panel minimized water usage because it cut down on evaporation because of the shading. And they found that it blocks wind. So there was less crop damage due to wind, and there was less crop damage due to erosion because all of these pillars helped keep the soil in place, and there was less dust erosion in the fields. And the panels themselves produced more electricity because they're kept cooler by being in conjunction with the green crops. And I assume, what's the term? It's not evaporation, it's what, transpiration? When plants basically sweat, evaporation from a plant. But that's an endothermic reaction, right? So it absorbs heat. That's why we sweat. It cools the body through so it's cooling the surrounding temperature, like those misters that you get like in Arizona and outdoor restaurants and stuff. One of the problems, of course, that they've identified is if it's a crop that requires heavy equipment, one wrong turn and you've run into your solar panels. So most of these panels have to be, I would think it would work well if you're dealing with grazing animals, for example, where you're not driving combines through the field, or any of the agriculture that is hand-picked, that people have to come in. And I would think it would be nicer for the farm workers as well, although farmers don't seem to care much about how nice it is for the farm workers. But being that it's partially shaded, I would think that's a more pleasant environment for picking the crops. So that was a quick run through. Anybody have any reaction to that? I know, Eric, you're involved in agricultural type stuff. A little bit, you're more forestry, right? Yep. So yeah, I don't think a tree farm would be a good place for a solar array, but well, I know
How do
that,
you feel?
yeah, go ahead, Marcy.
Sorry. This is from a question from my massage therapist, or a statement. They're putting a bunch of solar farms out in Brown County where I was, and she was adamantly opposed to solar farms. And her big argument was, well, you can never farm there again. And I was thinking, they're just poles in the ground. Can't you just pull them out and reclaim the land totally if you wanted to? All this other research aside, which I had read and cited to her, that there looked like there were some benefits. But just on the question of, how irreclaimable is the land once you put solar panels on it?
Yeah, you're right. Basically, the poles that they use for those ground mounted systems for the most part are what they call helical piers. They're basically screws, you're screwing them down into the ground like a doggy stake, so you're not even putting concrete into the ground. So if you wanted to remove a solar array, it would be as simple just to dismantle it, get out of there. That's one of the big advantages of wind and solar, is if you do want to reclaim the land back to an original use, pretty simple to do. With wind, you just have a concrete pad out in the middle of a field somewhere. But as an example, in Philo, where I live, or near where I live, there used to be a coal power plant there that they shut down in the 1970s. And the site of that coal power plant is still like the surface of the moon. It's completely ecological disaster with slag piles of coal all around, and the land is ruined, and it's 50, 100 acres of land that's just devastated. Whereas had it been a solar array, you could have had that out of there fairly quickly. Now there is the problem of, what do you do with the solar panels after, how do you recondition or recycle those? But there is some work going on. I know we've talked in past sessions where they do have there's an Indian company that's looking at recycling solar panels, and they're looking to harvest.
Back in the day, like 20, 25 years ago, they were talking about designing that in from the beginning. What happened to that? Is that not a practice in the industry?
The recycling of solar panels?
The ability to recycle simply.
Yeah, it's not widely done, largely because most of the panels that have ever been installed are still installed. So there hasn't been a great need for recycling. It's been a concern because solar has been held up as an ecological alternative. So much of that concern has been theoretical.
It's a totally valid concern. We're going to be installing really, really huge amounts of solar because we're converting the whole energy system to renewables. Right now, we're in the process of doing that. We're at a rapidly expanding early stage. The other thing is, I think maybe we should be looking at the larger picture, and the argument about putting them on farmland. Well, there are various arguments about putting them on farmland. If we're talking about really huge amounts, and we need better places to put them. And why are we not, for example, promoting the trashed strip mine areas in Ohio?
Yeah.
There's a vast amount of that.
Yeah, and that also is an alternative that's out there, the brownfields and the blackfield installation. Abandoned airports are another example. There's a lot of these kind of places that you can put them.
Right, but it's not as simple, because why they're putting them in farm fields is because it's cheap. The land doesn't cost that much. It's already flat. It's already cleared, and you can drive poles into it.
Well, the farmers are also looking at it as another revenue source. And if they can integrate this on their own property, get money from the electricity that they're selling, which tends to even out the profitability boom bust cycle of farming, because that's always an issue, because commodity prices often vary dramatically. So they're looking at it as, is this another way that they can get a secondary, more stable revenue source without
Right, well, that's encouraged.
impacting their primary business. And
That's the
for
good thing
some,
about wind.
yeah, wind's another alternative, but not everywhere has wind available to it. So these are all things where I think it's you're pointing out there, Dave, that we're in a wholesale transition to solar primarily, wind to get additionally, but wholesale. I mean, we're at 2.5% of our energy being produced by solar, and we're going to get up to 30, 40, 50% eventually. And this concentration and ubiquitousness of solar panels is going to be a disruptive thing in our society. People are going to
Right, so
rebel against it.
we have to integrate this intelligently because we're
Yeah.
going to be much of it. I
Yeah.
came up with the idea, I'm sure other people came up with the idea of why don't we do an overhead array over I-71 for 100 miles?
Yeah.
How much power would you get?
Yeah, of course, we talk about heavy equipment hitting things, anything along the highway, so it's going to get hit. So that's an issue too. I have a feeling, I keep thinking about solar in its present manifestation a little bit like I think about TV antennas on houses. When I was a kid, the whole landscape was dotted with
Right.
these ugly TV antennas that were on every house. And now you don't see any of them because the technology has changed. So I have a feeling that the technology is going to make it hopefully less of an issue. We're moving towards clear solar so that it becomes almost invisible. But the amount of land that's going to be used, whether it's brownfields, whether it's farm fields, whether it's houses, apartments, warehouses, it's going to cause problems. We're going to have to deal with the visual pollution of solar before we've figured out how to fix it.
And we got highway walls.
Yeah. Well, I'm not quite sure what the answer is yet, but I think this agricultural is one answer. It's one, because if you can space them out wider,
Yeah,
what we've been worried about in solar is how can we concentrate solar to get the maximum return for the minimum amount of space? Well, maybe that's a wrong approach. Maybe we need to start saying, how do we dilute it a little bit so that it may be bigger and it may be a little more expensive, but it meets with all of the needs of the land as opposed to just energy generation. So,
right. So what do you know? I'm interested in that one too. I've been noticing it lately, and I'm wondering what crops or what is suitable for that kind of agriculture.
well, in the articles I read, some of them were mentioning tomatoes, cilantro, chili peppers. So they were those kind of crops, not corn, wheat, soybeans. It's not that kind of crop. And they were really saying that at least in its present manifestation, we're looking at small farms, small, more integrated farms rather than the whole industrialized farm complex of the Midwest. I mean, that's a whole different discussion about how unsustainable the soybean, corn, hay rotation process is for this world that we live in. In fact, if you want to stay up at night, I saw somewhere, read somewhere, there's an aquifer out there in Nebraska that's basically the same amount of fresh water as the Great Lakes. And
I don't know if it's quite that much. It's the Ogallala, and it's the biggest aquifer in the country.
But they've drained it down pretty dramatically.
Right, hundreds of feet.
Yeah, so we basically lived off of this million-year bank account of water, and when
Right.
that's gone,
It's fossil water. It doesn't get replaced.
yeah. So how do you deal with that? So
You start doing more dry land farming.
yeah, you put solar arrays out there to help reduce moisture evaporation.
I
So
gotta go, guys.
okay, see you, Marcy. So it's all, I think, I know we're mostly older in here, but like when I talk to our interns and younger people, they're very well aware or very concerned that their world has basically been trashed. And I think we're finding there are solutions to this trashing. Now we just need to start implementing them. The world's pretty resilient when it comes to recovery. We just need to give it a chance. Now, part of the concentration of solar, I always like to use this example, and you may want to use it if you run into people who argue that this takes up so much space, it's not practical and all of that kind of stuff. My argument is, when they say that all of the solar panels would take up, such a big area for a solar array, and I always say that if everybody drove a car, we'd need a parking lot the size of Montana. You don't put everything in one place. This is all distributed. You don't park all the cars in the country in one parking lot, and we're not going to put solar. We need to distribute the solar where it's being used,
Right.
whatever form that takes.
The actual amount is not, in context of the size of the country, the actual amount is not that big. They used to, remember like 30 years ago or more, people were saying that, well, you could power the whole country with an area in Arizona 100 miles by 100 miles.
Yeah.
Which is a very small part of the country. That was back in the days when, efficiency was a third of what it is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a long time ago that they were saying that. And we would need that much more now. So that might be not too far off as an estimate of how much area do you need to cover with solar panels. That would be for all of the power.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we do know that every home, typically, at least if it's a 1 or 2 story home, the roof space is usually enough to provide all of the power required for that dwelling. So if you just think about it in those terms, the amount of space required can be generated on the footprint of the dwelling. That's doable, a little bit more than what you need for parking. So yeah.
Jay,
Uh-huh.
the experience I've been having has basically been those people who are against solar are really against solar.
Uh-huh.
There's no middle ground in that. And after talking with these individuals, I'm starting to really get the feeling that based on our last president, that we don't need it, and it becomes a political situation. I'm serious.
It's absolutely been politicized. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to the total extent that we don't need it, and the arguments go on. So in the seminars I'm looking at, I asked the question, how many people are here because of greenhouse gases and stuff like that, and how many people are here because they're afraid of the environment, and how many people. But it all goes away when you say, what's in it for me? And that's
Sure.
what I find out, where the common ground starts. What's in it for me? And if you can't answer that question, then you're not doing a sales.
What's
Right.
in it for you is a robust economy in which you get to participate and grab your share of the loot.
See, those people who are pro-solar look for all of the rationale to support their position. Of course, all the people who are against it have all their rationale that, yes, this is normal things for the earth goes up and down in temperature and stuff like that. So this is just a natural thing that we're experiencing.
Right. Well, right. That only in
but
America do we get denialists like we've been encountering for the last many years. I don't know why we let our propagandists get away with that kind of crap.
I think we've got sort of a built-in response there, Bob, on much of this, because solar plus storage is really appealing to the prepper in all of us, and when you start having the Ford Lightning, big macho trucks that are EVs that can be used as backup for your own home power, and electrical outlets, and you could run your power equipment out there off your truck, and I think solar is about to be machoized, because it is all about resiliency. It's all about self-sufficiency. Tell it give the finger to the man, I'm going to take my beans and rice and hide out for the next 30 years. You need solar, you need battery, you need all of these things. And,
Yeah,
and
I
so,
get their attention when they say, where's the beef? Where's the beef?
well, right now
And
you can also say
I
you're
get-
basically, a grid tied solar is cheaper, an average of 7-year payback on a 25-year system. How
Right.
can you beat that? It's in your self-interest. It's the cheapest economical alternative. Plus,
Yeah.
when we start seeing things like, you've seen the ransomware stuff now, we're probably going to see a spate of hacks into the utility grid. And if you start seeing systematic, I guess, what's the right word? But if people lose faith in the reliability of the grid on a wholesale basis, then the move towards solar will be accelerated because solar gives them that hedge against these long-term outages. We saw that for Bill down in Texas. We see it in California after the wildfires. There's always this run on solar plus storage, after a disaster. So all we need is a couple of Chinese companies or Russian companies, blackmailing AEP or First Energy and shutting down the grid for a week at a time, and that's easy to do. It's really easy to do. Yeah,
Yeah,
Bill,
but
just a second. Bill, you're muted. Bill.
I'm not necessarily adding to the conversation at hand, but I did take a trip with some friends last Sunday, and we toured 3 solar farms.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to share my screen. This is a 10 megawatt unit right here, single axis tracker. Can you see that?
Oh man, that got some wind, huh?
I don't know whether it got wind, but this particular tracker from RBI has a drive shaft, and I think the drive shaft broke.
Yeah, it twisted them.
Where the misalignment is, and and what kind of struck me was, and there were some other problems with this farm. It's only 2 years old, and everybody with me said, well, why don't we call them and tell them about this? And my reaction is they know about it, probably, and I'm just it's my opinion that RBI is the least expensive of the 3 racking tracker system mounts, Array Technologies and Nextracker being the other 2. It's my opinion that this is the least expensive, and it occurred to me that you go in and put in a farm, and you get cash flow based on that, and you also enhance your cash flow by accelerated depreciation on the hardware. Can you refresh my memory? Is that you can depreciate the whole thing in 5 years, or is there a percentage on that?
Well, I'm not really sure with utility scale, but with commercial scale, you can actually effectively reduce it or depreciate it in the first year, at least currently. Now that may change, but for this product, it's what you end up getting is with the discount, it's like 86% of the cost can be depreciated in year 1. That's assuming that you've taken the federal investment tax credit, right,
Yeah,
Don?
you get more than 100% actually, Jay, because you get the credit for the 30%, and then you get to depreciate the 85%. So you're depreciating effectively more than 100%. You're writing off more than you paid for it because of the credit.
In 1 year, yeah.
Yes, all up front, and that's for all right now. That's for all industrial property. For a business, that might, like you said, that'll be going away. I think it expires in a year or 2 anyway. But with the current administration, I don't see them being ambitious or being anxious to go ahead and provide companies with a lot of extra benefits again.
Yeah. Well, the price for utility scale systems is down around $1 a watt. So,
Wow.
so the payback on these systems has to be in the 1 or 2 or 3 year period. So these guys are making a mint, which is one of the reasons why they're all rushing, and we're seeing so much activity in the utility scale. But I think there has been a rush towards low cost, and you're probably going to see more of that, you know, damage or faulty systems being put out there. We talked about last week the fact that panels are getting thinner, the glass is getting thinner, the aluminum is getting thinner, and I think you'll start to see more wind damage from these panels, more defects in the panels, because they're trying to figure out how to make them cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And if you make something cheap, it's not surprisingly becomes cheap. You know, it doesn't last 25 years. So
Yeah.
we'll wait and
The other-
see.
The other thing, we toured 3 solar farms in the Houston area, one of which was 350 megawatts, miles of rows and rows of racking. It just blew me away.
Yeah,
Not only that, jobs, everybody's advertising, they need labor force.
Yep.
You know, probably 200 people working for 2 years or something of that nature.
mhm.
It's very promising to me. You know, the transition to a green future is happening in Houston.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we talked last week, there was a new array going in Kentucky. I think it was like 188 megawatts. It's part of a deal with Amazon to provide 600 and some megawatts of power. And they were hiring 300 technicians. And I think you're right, about 2 years is the time period. In fact, at the last class I just did, there was a student in the class from one of the local unions who they oversee a workforce. They're sending all their guys out working on the arrays. But these are largely unskilled jobs, you know, because it's carrying panels, mounting them on a rack. You do that 8 hours a day, you know, 5 days a week for the next 2 years. Not very exciting, but
I noted that the shredder equipment to drive the piles in the ground, the 6-inch wide flanges, that equipment actually had a little GPS thing on it. So I imagine they drive the prescribed distance and pound a column in the ground and drive another 30 feet or whatever it is. And
right.
it's got to be automated as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, those driven piles, or if they're screwed down in, yeah, all of those things are GPS monitored. And they're doing site assessments and repair assessments using drones, which take a lot of the labor out of the market. You can do infrared review to identify hotspots on your panels using drones. You can look at perimeter fencing. You can do things. We talked about this at a previous one as well. It's like what used to take 12 hours with 2 people now takes, you know, 1 hour with 1 person with a drone. So, you know, we're growing up as an industry, you know, and we're becoming more efficient. And while that may mean that per watt there are less jobs, we're putting in so many more watts that the jobs are being created. But one of the discussions I get into with government people, because they love to have this simplistic thing of, we're shutting down a coal mine, so let's train everybody to be solar installers, problem solved. And I always say, listen, a guy who is a coal miner is probably not a good solar installer. These are 2 different skill sets. Maybe that guy becomes a truck driver, and somebody else who might have been a truck driver becomes a solar installer. But, you know, it's not a let's move them from coal to solar just because they're in the energy industry. It has nothing to do with it, you know. So they need not to be looking. And the other issue is, let's say you're in Morgantown, West Virginia, and the coal mine shuts down. They like to look at how can we install solar to replace this industry. Morgantown, West Virginia may not be the place for solar. It's in the aggregate, it all is good, but in localized economies, it could be a real painful transition, with the people having to leave. In fact, one government person was just asking me how they could boost their local economy if it wasn't good for solar. I said, really high-speed broadband, that brings jobs in. I mean, a lot of people with remote work, you don't have to appeal to an industry. That's industrial revolution thinking. You need to appeal to a workforce and bring the workforce to you. The industries are virtual. They're out there wherever they happen to be. There's a lot of people who would love to live in the mountains of West Virginia and work for a company in San Francisco, and they have that capability, except they don't have the internet. So that's the thing that's holding them back, not whether solar is located in their county.
Yeah, at least in terms of coal, it's not that big an economic factor in terms of jobs in coal as what it was once 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
95% of the jobs in coal have gone away due to diminishing demand and mostly to automation.
Yeah. Yep. I think only 60,000 or even less, 60,000 was a few years ago, people working coal in the United States. Most of those guys are going to be up in North Carolina in the Powder River Basin, not North Carolina, North Dakota, in the Powder River Basin area. But, yeah, I mean, solar employs 300,000-400,000
Right.
versus 60,000. So, yeah, I mean,
Oil
the
and
world
gas
changes.
there'll be a lot of workers displaced in oil and gas. There are other sectors that'll be heavily affected. And also, what happens to, towns that were dependent on that coal-fired power plant that shut down and is no longer paying taxes. And
Yeah.
but those are not, I mean, it really is a fairly limited set of major impact issues.
Yep. Well, I see it in the town that I live near. I told you Philo had an old coal power plant that they abandoned in the 70s. There has been nothing that has ever replaced it. I mean, the town has basically withered away and died. And the people who live there, I like to refer to it as a peasant mentality. The lord of the manor left, and they're still waiting for somebody to come in and tell them what to do. Well, nobody's coming. So, the smart ones moved out of town. That's kind of what's happened. And the rest of them stayed and voted for Trump,
Right.
So that's what happened. So, I don't know. We're not going to solve it. But anyway, I think that the solar agriculture is a hopeful sign. Perhaps it's not the be all end all, but I really think when you're talking like Bill, going out there and seeing acres and acres, hundreds of acres of solar panels, that would make me nervous, as a society.
Mhm.
It's like, this is too much of a good thing. How do we diffuse this a little bit? Because 100 acres of solar panels on a landscape, to me, is a blight.
Right. Well,
But so is a shopping mall. A shopping mall is a blight on the landscape as well. And for some reason, people think they get a vote when solar or wind goes in, when they never get a vote when a shopping mall or an Amazon warehouse or a cell tower or a road or any of these other things that also impact our landscape. So, but I think we as an industry should be aware that what we're doing has a negative impact as well as a positive impact. And we need to just accept that and try and minimize it.
well, there are 1,000-acre and 1,500-acre wind farms going in Ohio right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't have the same visceral reaction to a 1,000-acre wind farm, because I guess aesthetically, I find that kind of interesting, as opposed to just I don't know. I have a negative reaction to a 1,000-acre cornfield. To me, that's that's boring and icky, especially in the wintertime after it's
That
just
was
stubble
supposed to
out.
be
in the-
prairie and we should have left some of it to be prairie,
Yeah.
right? So. yeah.
But again, I don't get to make the rules, but I think solar, we just need to be conscious of it. I don't know that that's going to help, but be conscious of the fact that people who
Right.
object to it have a legitimate cause for
We need to
objecting.
be doing this large scale design work up front before it hits us in the face, because it's hitting us in the face right now.
Deal with the aesthetics. I mean, that's probably all it takes. You know, try and figure out if you're going to put in a big solar array like that, be conscious of how it affects the aesthetics of the area, you know, and try and address that. I don't know what that means, but you know, it could be as simple as just a barrier blocking it from the road, the view of it.
Right.
So,
So we do that routinely. Yeah.
all right, anybody else have any questions, concerns, comments? Nope. All right, well, we'll all meet back on Tuesday, and if you have any suggestions for topics, just send me an email. And Bob had mentioned that there is a Aurora Solar webinar conference thing going on as we speak. So if you want to go online, look at Aurora Solar, like Aurora Borealis. I'm sure you can still log in and sign into it. They've got some good sessions. It's going on today and tomorrow. So help yourself on that. All right. See you guys later. Bye-bye.